Hi. Back in the good old days, 2001, where many of you weren't even um, probably walking yet, on 9/11 we were attacked, and that frankly changed everything. And it certainly changed people's lives here in this country. And I wanted to use that as an example of what I mean by law and order, which was crucial for the public good, and we know that it is. Um, but also the conflict that we have here in this country with our individual freedoms. What are more important, our individual freedoms or the public good? And after 9/11, the US Congress passed a series of laws. They passed the Patriot Act, which basically its job was to root out um, terrorism in this country. We're talking about foreign terrorism, not domestic terrorism. And a whole bunch of new laws went into effect. This was when the Department of Homeland Security became another bureaucratic department in the government. The Transportation Safety Authority, those TSA agents that so many people dislike extremely a lot, myself included for numerous reasons. Um, it, now in order to get on a plane now, you had to take off your belt, you had to take out your computer. I had a TSA agent go through, asked me to open my computer so that she could look at it, and I immediately got quite indignant. And I thought, well, either I'm going to get arrested or I'm going to catch my next flight. So I did protest verbally, but I did open the computer. But in any case, I want you to think about this. When someone challenges your right, let's say, to passing speech, or your right to privacy, okay, if that's being challenged, then you will certainly protest that, I'm sure. But if it's being challenged, if that right is being challenged to protect the public good, you may decide that, well, I can give up a little bit of my individual freedom if it's for the public good. And this is where you need to really think about what is most important to you. Because please remember, a government can give you freedoms and civil liberties, but they can also take them away. And most of you, whenever I ask that question in class, most students will say, well, yeah, look at the Japanese during World War II. Absolutely. Okay. American citizens that were interned in camp for 4 years certainly experienced where their individual freedoms were considered not as important, certainly, as the public good. We also know that there was not one incident of any Japanese American person attempting to terrorize or to commit an act that would hurt the United States. Okay. So what we need to find always is a balance. And right now we're kind of struggling with that, with this whole idea of sheltering in place and lifting the restrictions, and people who are protesting that their individual liberties are being stepped on. And it's like, where do you find common ground? This is a question that we will wrestle with probably for the rest of our days. Let me switch now to loose interpretation of the Constitution and rigid interpretation. That Constitution that we have, okay, and And I think there were about 27 amendments in it, meaning 27, if you want to say, 27 elements of that addresses many, many different issues. For example, we know about the Bill of Rights. Okay, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. We pretty much know that they deal with individual liberties. But the rest of those constitutional amendments deal with other issues. For example, in 1912, we passed an amendment, and remember, I think it's 3/4 of the states must pass the amendment. 1912, we passed an amendment that called for the direct election of senators by the people. Well, we had to change our constitution to say that. Okay. When we prohibited alcohol, prohibition, we had to make an amendment to the Constitution. When we decided to let people drink again in 1933, prohibition only lasted about 13 years. When we wanted to do away with that prohibition of alcohol amendment, we had to pass an amendment that, refuted that prohibition amendment. So what I'm trying to get you to think about is that document and what it says was written about 250 years ago now. And we don't know really what our founders were thinking at the end and why they wrote what they did. We do know that they had to compromise. But if we're trying to interpret what, let's say, James Madison wrote in 1787 at the Constitutional Convention and try to apply it to 2020, the year 2020, well, it's pretty obvious we're going to get different interpretations of what that piece of paper, that document means. So I'm going to give you an example. This is the best example I can give, okay, right now. In 1803, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we start looking at the early 1800s. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson was president. Now, he believed in a rigid interpretation, meaning if it didn't say it in the Constitution, well, you couldn't do it. 1803, he is approached by the French foreign ambassador and who says, Mr. President, we would like to sell you, France would like to sell you this chunk of territory, which is called the Louisiana Purchase. And tomorrow I'll show you a map what I mean. We would like to sell it to the United States for, I think it was $15 million. It was a big chunk of territory. And Thomas Jefferson said, well, sounds like a great idea. We could have the access to the Mississippi River, and then we would get New Orleans with it. Oh boy, this is a great deal, great deal. But he also said to his advisors, I can't buy that. I can't buy that piece of territory because nowhere in the Constitution does it say the federal government can purchase property. And his advisors said to him, Mr. President, you could double the size of the country if you purchase this Louisiana Purchase. We will get New Orleans. We've been wanting New Orleans as a port city for years. We'll have free access to the Mississippi. How could you not purchase this? And Jefferson really went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, because if you look at the Constitution, a rigid interpretation of that would be, in fact, nowhere does it say that the federal government can purchase property. Doesn't say the federal government can purchase property, but it also doesn't say anything about the federal government being unable to purchase property. So Jefferson's rigid interpretation gave way to him being much more pragmatic and reasonable and looking at the pros and cons. And in the end, we did purchase that Louisiana purchase, and we did double the size of the country, and we got a wonderful chunk of territory. In fact, it was so big we hadn't even any idea about what the heck we even bought, but we bought it anyway. So, loose interpretation, rigid interpretation. Perhaps what's the most important thing here is if this is something that is going to be practical and helpful to promoting our new country in 1803, then Thomas Jefferson decided to make the purchase. And yes, he got some, backlash about it, but for the most part, most people applauded his decision. Okay, so bring your questions to class tomorrow and we'll discuss them. Alrighty, I'll see you then.